What's up, people? I'm Alex. I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist, and I'm an ass expert. Today, we're going to go over some technique pointers to help you feel hip thrusts in your glutes. I'm going to detail 4 common hip thrust mistakes, explain why they're wrong, and then I'll tell you what you should be doing instead. The 4 mistakes we're going to go over today are non-vertical shins at the top, an overly wide or overly narrow stance, looking up or looking back, and not squeezing your glutes at the top. Hip thrust mistake number 1 is having non-vertical shins at the top. If your heels are tucked in too far, you're decreasing your angles at the knees, and by doing this, you're deferring more responsibility to your quads. Since the goal of hip thrusts is to isolate the glute muscles as much as possible, extra quad activity is just not desired. But that does not mean you should move your feet out away from you as far as possible. When you open up your knee angle and overcorrect this error by walking your feet out too far, you lose efficiency in your positioning. Now the force that I push into the ground is no longer vertical, rather I'm pushing diagonally into the ground. This means I'm wasting energy pushing back into the bench, a movement that is likely pretty quad dominant and creates issues with the bench tipping backwards. But more importantly than those issues, walking your feet out too far decreases the amount of weight you can hip thrust. And when it comes to building muscle, handling heavier weights with control and good form is always better. And you'll be able to handle heavier weights in the hip thrust if you're pushing your feet straight down into the ground. At the top of the movement, aim for vertical shins. You don't need to be perfect, just remember that the closer you can get, the less the quads will take over, and the more you'll be able to hip thrust. Mistake number 2 also relates to your stance, and this mistake is spreading your feet too wide or bringing them in too narrow. Too narrow of a stance, and you'll be in a position of poor stability. There is just no need to keep your feet so close that you have to worry more about balancing than moving the weight. That being said, if you spread your feet out further than shoulder width apart without also jamming your knees out over your foot, you'll run into the same efficiency problems that we discussed with the feet being too far away from you. In this position, you're pushing out and down, and you are putting a twisting force on your knees. If you like a very wide stance, that is fine, just make sure your knees track over your feet. You can accomplish this by visualizing jamming your knees out. However, in this position, the adductors or groin muscles are stretched and in a better position to assist with hip extension. And what is hip extension? Well, it's the exact movement of a hip thrust, the movement we're trying to perform with our glutes and our glutes only. So with that wide stance, you're getting more groin activity, which really just isn't desired here. While we can never perfectly isolate a muscle, we can limit the role of the quads and the adductors with the heels at about shoulder width stance. That's a good place to be. Mistake number 3 is looking up or back throughout the movement. This creates 2 issues. The first issue is your line of sight changes throughout the movement. At the bottom, you're looking up and forward, but as your back angle changes, so does your gaze, and you gradually look further and further back as the rep progresses. Now, this might not seem like an issue at first, but here's why it matters. Having a consistent point on the ground or wall to look at helps with your proprioception in the lift. Proprioception being your awareness of the position of your body in time and space. Here's an example of what I mean. If I told you to fix your gaze at a point on the wall in front of you and then threw a tennis ball at you, there's a pretty good chance you would catch it without directly tracking the ball. The fixed gaze limits the amount of sensory inputs you're taking in and makes catching the ball fairly doable, or at least deflecting it away from your face. But if I told you to trace all 4 corners of the wall in a circular motion with your gaze and continue to do this as I threw a ball at you, you're probably going to get hit in the face. When you tuck your chin down in the hip thrust, you allow yourself to have that stationary gaze on the wall in front of you, and you limit the amount of sensory inputs, just like in the tennis ball example. This gives you better awareness and control of your body and allows for cleaner, more consistent reps where you can really just focus in on your glutes. However, proprioceptive control is only one of the 2 reasons you should tuck your chin with hip thrusting. The other reason is to prevent overextension at the top. First of all, overextension at your neck, as this is pretty clear how in this position your neck is pretty wrenched backwards. But also overextension of the spine, specifically the lower back. When you look back at the top like this, the lower back has a tendency to arch into what is called anterior pelvic tilt. This is a less than optimal position for the glutes to operate in, and it is a position that the muscles of the lower back tend to become overactive in. Oftentimes, this looking back creates an environment where the thrust is felt just as much in the lower back as it is in the glutes, so tuck your chin so that you can tuck your pelvis, fix your eyes onto a spot in the wall in front of you, then keep them there for the duration of the set. The last common hip thrust mistake we'll discuss that makes feeling the movement in your glutes a challenge is a lack of squeeze at the top. While this may feel pretty intuitive, it is rarely used in practice. So if you're looking to feel hip thrust in your glutes more, simply squeeze and hold at the top for 1 second at every rep. It's a simple change, but it's a change that will likely increase your range of motion, as now you're finishing every rep completely. And it is a move that will increase your time under tension, as now your glutes will be under load for a longer set. Both of these factors can help you feel the glutes at work. Cool, so just to recap, our 4 mistakes were non-vertical shins at the top. Again, you don't have to be perfect, but you shoot for as vertical shins as possible. You can have a partner tell you this, you can look in a mirror, or just prop your phone up against a dumbbell and record yourself. Not too hard. Making sure your squat stance, or you're in about a squat stance, So not going super wide, not going super narrow, just like you would in squats. When you set up your feet, think, I'm gonna put my feet in a position like I would for squatting, maybe slightly more narrow, but the point being we want a nice, steady base to do your hip thrusts on, and nothing super inefficient like the wide stance, nothing unstable like the super narrow stance. The third was tucking your chin, again for that proprioceptive cue. Having that stationary point of reference means less is changing in your visual field. You're not swinging around up and down with your head looking at different things, and that adds control, consistency, and focus to the lift. You're really able to just ignore all the external sensory inputs and focus in on your glutes when you do that. Also, it helps you to tuck in your pelvis a little bit, which, well, isn't super necessary for everyone. Typically, individuals find it easier to feel their glutes when they're in that tucked pelvis position, tucked chin, squeezing your glutes. That arch back tends to get an arch in your lower back, and then you feel the muscle or the movement just as much in your lower back as your glutes. And then the fourth mistake was not squeezing at the top. Nothing super confusing there. Have common sense, squeeze your glutes, you're going to feel the muscle more, really focusing on it. And this was more of a reminder than a tip because, like I said, it's really just not used much in practice. It's more of a discipline cue than an actual physical cue to pay attention to. It's more something to remind yourself of every single set. Okay, I'm going to squeeze my glutes for a 1 Mississippi count every rep, every set. You add in that consistency, and your glutes are going to be getting a much better workload in from hip thrusts. So now I'm going to scroll the names of my Patreons up on the screen. They gain access to workout programs spanning about 8 to 12 weeks for at-home and in-gym programs. They also gain access to hit me up on Patreon DMs or email, and I get back to them quickly. It's really up to your own initiative. You get the programs, you get the access to me. It's all about what you do with them. If you want to send me pictures of you deadlifting or squatting and ask for technique pointers in your biomechanics, how to become more efficient, how to become stronger, you can do that. You can send me whatever, and I'll get back to you. I like self-motivated people. I like helping self-motivated people. So if you put in the effort, I will reciprocate and put in the effort back for you. Also, the podcast is up. The Medich Brand Show that used to be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts is up on the Patreon. So all of that is on the Patreon. It's pretty damn cheap, and I'll leave a link in the description as I always do. Appreciate you guys sticking by for this video. I've done how to feel a muscle and specific movements before. I've done videos like that on Instagram. This is the first one on YouTube, so let me know what you thought. Let me know what you liked. Let me know what you didn't like. I have more ideas of this nature, so if you want to see more, just let me know, and I will get to work on those. In the meantime, appreciate you stopping by. Please like and subscribe if you liked and you want to see more. And I'll talk to you next time. Peace.